Naomi went missing several months ago. She and I had had a fight and it ended with her storming out of the house. These things happen. It was when she didn't come back in the morning that I began to worry. After 2 days, I started calling her friends. No one had heard from her. After a little while, I resorted to filing a missing persons report. The police weren't much help. At the very least, I figured she'd come back to get her stuff. It was after the first week that I started to fear for the worst. After 2 months, I pretty much gave up hope. I packed her things into a series of boxes and dropped them off with her parents. Alive or dead, I had accepted that I'd never see her again. As time went on, I started to move on with my life. I hoped she was somewhere doing fine, but I'd all but accepted that she was dead. Around the time that I'd given up hope, there was a knock on my door. I checked the peephole, but no one was there. I slowly opened the door to see that someone had left a flower pot on my doormat. There was a card attached that read, "Sorry for your loss." It was odd, but I had been putting up flyers for a while. I figured it was one of the neighbors being nice. It was an orange clay pot that someone had put a small green flower into. It hadn't blossomed yet. The pot had been painted. I picked it up to realize that someone had painted the name Naomi on the flower pot in a crude fashion. The soil was dry and the plant seemed sickly. I poured some water into it and set it on my windowsill. I posted my last few flyers around the neighborhood asking if anyone had information concerning Naomi. I left my number. No one called. Felt like I was going through the motions for the sake of it. This ultimately ended when I posted a flyer at the liquor store and ended up buying a bottle of scotch. Upon returning home, I noticed that the flower had started to bloom. Before cracking open the bottle, I made sure to give it a bit more water and sit down. I poured myself a glass of Johnny Walker and sat on the couch. We fought. A lot. But I still loved her. After 2 or 3 glasses of scotch, I looked over to the plant and saw the name Naomi. Don't ask me to explain why, but I couldn't help but speak to it. While slurring through my vowels, I said, "Damn it, Naomi. Why did you have to leave?" The plant remained still and did not respond. I finished my scotch in a single gulp and said, "I'm so sorry, babe. I know I can be a bit of a jerk. Please come back to me." The plant did not respond. I had drank half the fifth and I was more than a little woozy. I stumbled over to the kitchen counter to put my glass away when I said one last thing. I stared right at the plant and said, "Sorry. I'm so sorry." I'd always been a bit of a lightweight. That is where my memory faded to blackness. I fell into a black and dreamless sleep only to wake up on the floor in a puddle of what I hoped was drool. After a quick shower, I changed into some jeans and moved to the couch. It was a lazy Sunday. Periodically, I'd take a break from the Xbox to talk to the plant. The plant didn't respond. At one point, I said, "Do you mind if I call you Naomi?" The plant remained silent. Then I said, "So, you're the silent type." The plant did not respond. "Well, Naomi, I like your yellow petals. You have a nice stem. I'm sorry I yelled at you last night," I said as I moved over to the windowsill. Maybe it was the wind, but as I finished complimenting the plant, it seemed to move a little. It was probably just coincidence, but I ran with it. I crouched down and ran my index finger along the underside of one of the petals and said, "All right, Naomi, I'll be sure to get you a treat when I go out later." Whether it was still moving as a result of the touching or swaying for some other reason, I thought it was sweet that the flower swayed. I headed for the door and said, "I'll be back, Naomi. Don't eat all the carbon dioxide while I'm out." Maybe it was just me, but after taking the time to talk to Naomi the Daffodil, I felt a little better. I knew the real Naomi was gone. Even still, it felt nice to care for something that reminded me of her. I picked up some plant food in one of those water globes that slowly waters the soil. It had a trippy stained glass feel to it that the original Naomi would have appreciated. I returned home and gave the little flower its gifts before settling down for the night. I opted to sleep on the couch that night. Shortly before passing out, I said, "I love you, Naomi. I'll talk to you tomorrow." That night, I got the first decent night's sleep I had experienced in quite a while. My phone went off at around 5 in the morning. I reached over and grabbed it. I had a missed call, but no voicemail. I looked over toward the flower to see Naomi standing there. She was smiling. I couldn't help but stumble to my feet and rush towards her. In doing so, I almost knocked over the flower. As much as I wanted my girlfriend to be there, it must have been a dream. I apologized to the flower and said, "Sorry about that, Naomi. It must have been a bad dream." The plant seemed fine, but it did not respond. I put it back on the windowsill and opened the curtains. The sun was low in the sky. It hadn't quite poked up over the horizon, but I could see faint shades of orange just over the trees. Naomi the Daffodil was caught in a light breeze, and the smell of flowers filled my nostrils. I smiled and headed into the kitchen to make some coffee. When I returned, I was halfway through a sentence when I saw Naomi standing there. I dropped my coffee. The hot liquid seared my feet. She stood in front of the window and was pointing at the flower. She said something. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear any noise coming from it. It was around that point where the sun poked up over the trees. As the sunlight moved into view, it cut right through her. It was as if she was a mirage that was fading away as the last bits of humidity faded from the air. I stared at the potted plant as the last traces of Naomi's form pushed it from the windowsill. The potted plant seemed to fall in slow motion as I moved toward the window. It hit the ground before I could save it. The clay shattered, and the soil spread out all over my tile floor. I knelt down to try and save the plant when I saw the glint of something shiny in the soil. I had reached down to pick it up and immediately recoiled in horror. It was a human finger that had partially decomposed. Attached to the finger was the ring I had bought Naomi shortly before our fight. I immediately called the police. The sun was shining through the window in full force by this point. I turned my eyes away from the bright light when I noticed Naomi standing over some of the soil at the edge of my bedroom. Her expression was sad. She seemed like she was crying. There was a loud knock on the door. I stood to open it. It was the police. As I explained the situation, I half expected to see Naomi when I turned around, but she was gone. I was taken to the station for questioning as they gathered up as much evidence as they could. I told them about the plant being delivered and the card that read, "Sorry for your loss." The police had gathered the card and evidence from the house. As they grilled me over my location at various times and why I hadn't reported it sooner, I was as honest as possible. Eventually, I was sent home. Something that struck me as odd was that they asked if I had been aware of any other flower pots. As I was to later find out, several other individuals in the area had received similar houseplants, only to empty the pot and find the remains of a loved one. I can only wonder what would have happened had the plant never fallen over. The following day, I went to Lowe's and bought a flower pot that could hang on the windowsill. I planted the daffodil bulb and placed it on the window. With a black Sharpie, I wrote the word Naomi on the side. As time went on, the flower would grow, and I'd have many conversations with it. Sometimes, when the sun was low and the wind was just right, I could swear that I saw my Naomi standing outside the window. She still looked sad, but I cannot help but think she enjoyed the flowers. I'll always miss her.